Hi, my name's Elle Stokes. I'm a social media ambassador for National Youth Arts Wales, and this is.
I'm Jen Lunn. I am a playwright and a director and a producer and quite a lot of other things, mainly working in theatre. I have been referred to as a theatrical Swiss Army knife on occasions, and my pronouns are she, her.
I got the opportunity to work with Jan on the residency at National Youth Arts Wales, and it was so lovely to work with you. And I just wanted to interview you and talk to you a bit more in depth about your career.
Career is such a funny word, isn't it?
Mm.
I think it's one of the things I guess I would say at the beginning of this and say to anyone starting out, what you think your career is going to be, it won't look anything like that. And that is all for the good. But I think I spent probably the first 10, 15 years after graduating thinking, when am I going to start having my career? And then had this kind of slight epiphany moment where I was like, oh, this is my career. It just doesn't look like what I was told it
Mm.
should look like.
What is the first play or theatrical experience you remember going to?
Oh my gosh, that is an almost impossible question for me to answer. Um, and that is because I am one of those hilarious people who grew up doing theatre. My parents met doing Amdram. I was in my first show when I was 12 weeks old. It was the Scottish tragedy. And I played Baby Macduff. My parents were Macduff and Lady Macduff. And my mum used to take me on stage. And just as the murderers came in, she would pinch me, apparently, to make me like cry out. Theatre abuse early on. But the audience would then be like, oh, it's a real baby.
Baby.
But one of the things I do remember, one of my early sort of theatre experiences that I remember is going to Stratford to the RSC. I was about 7, I think, and they had to give me a booster seat. I don't know if they still have them there, but basically like you had in the car, but I had one of those so that I could sit on the seat and still see. And I think it was a production of like Merry Wives of Windsor or something, and it was like very bright and colourful, which of course to a 7-year-old was just like, oh. And I remember that these women sat under those old-fashioned hairdryer things with like curlers in their hair, and it just being so colourful, and me thinking, oh, this is so exciting, and I'm really understanding that Stratford was like really important and like it was really special.
So growing up, going into going into theatre, was it sort of a I'm already kind of involved in theatre and I'm just not going to leave? Or was it kind of a decision of actually I'm deciding to get proper training and take this further?
That's a good question. I think it was fairly inevitable, actually. And it's interesting, like neither of our parents, actually worked in theatre. They had quite ordinary jobs, but they had met doing theatre, and we did it. We didn't have summer holidays. We did theatre in the summer. Do you know what I mean? So in some ways, I think it probably was relatively kind of inevitable. And I remember sort of always just being like, oh well, that's what I want to do. And I remember sort of at sort of, I guess 15, 16, sort of being like, I don't care what I do, and really not knowing what I would do in theatre. I wasn't a brilliant actor. And I sort of understood that, I think. I looked around and was like, oh, there are people who are better at this than me. Even though I'd grown up doing theatre and I knew that directors existed and I knew that stage managers existed, I don't think anybody really talks about those being jobs. When you sort of think about theatre, it's like what all the kind of stuff you do at school and any extracurricular stuff. It's all about acting, right? And yeah, I had a sense that I wasn't brilliant at that. But I remember saying at one point, I don't mind what I'm doing, but if when I'm 40, I'm just sweeping the stage in a theatre, as long as I'm in a theatre, I don't mind. So I think it was sort of like that. So really for me, the decision was about like, what am I going to train in? Like, what training am I going to do? Am I going to go to university and then do a postgrad? And I ended up doing a degree in directing, which I was unsure about because I felt a bit like I was going to graduate at like 21. And it was like, well, I won't be ready to be a director at 21. So that feels a bit silly. But I went to Rose Bruford and I applied for the directing course. I was very like unsure about it. I remember I'd had one audition, one acting audition, which hadn't gone very well. It hadn't been fun. Um, and then I had this interview at Rose Bruford and I had to do a bit of directing in front of the principal. And then we kind of went on a tour. And what was amazing about Rose Bruford, and I think probably is still, I haven't been back for a while, but there were like actors in practice skirts on a lawn, and there were like swans and geese, and they were like practicing Chekhov, and I was like, oh my God. And then there was like the costume block, and people were making costumes, and then there were people making sets, and I was just like, oh, this feels like theatre. This feels like a whole load of people making theatre, and that's what I want to be doing. And they offered me a place, and so I pulled out of all my other auditions and things because I was just like, yeah, I think I want to be there because it just felt like loads of people making theatre together, and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. That.
What was your experience like training on that course?
What was great about my course was the first year we pretty much did the acting course. We had a few bits that we didn't do that we did separately. But that was really, really, I think that played a massive part in me becoming the director that I am, because I had a real understanding of those, like that, those basic kind of techniques and understanding what actors did and what their process was. And so as a director, it really enables you to tap into that and to use those things and be like, oh, you know that thing. My second year, I actually went to university in America, which was bonkers. I went to a university in Texas in 1998, I guess it would have been. George Bush was the governor. Bill Clinton was on trial for all the Monica Lewinsky stuff. It was a crazy time. But what was great about that was I got to do some real like academic courses. So I did a brilliant, like I did the whole of theatre history. I had an incredible theatre history teacher. I did history of cinema. I did a beginning filmmaking course. I did directing, but I also did like play analysis. And it was for me, it was really great. It was a really great kind of bit of learning that I probably wouldn't have got at Rose Bruford, actually, which was a much more practical conservatoire kind of training. So I think in a way, I sort of got the best of both worlds. I got that really practical stuff being at Rose Bruford, and then I got this chance to kind of do this real academic study in America, and then came back for my third year, which was predominantly like making shows. And that was kind of great. We were relatively well supported, and we did a kind of devising project, and we did a new writing project, and that was the beginning of my like love for new writing, which I guess then fed into me much later on becoming a playwright. And I did a playwriting class in America as well. So I guess that was also the beginning of it. And I had no idea at the time. I was absolutely wasn't going to be a playwright. That wasn't my intention at all. And then we did a production. And so both in America and in London, I got to put on one act plays that I directed and sort of semi-produced myself, you know. So I felt really ready actually when I left drama school to make work. And that's basically what I did. I didn't take the very traditional route of becoming an assistant director. I just went straight into making my own work.
What sort of pushed you or inspired you to write your first play?
Well, and that came so much later, I guess. I mean, in that I wrote a play when I was at university. It wasn't great, but it was okay. Um, and then I worked with writers for years, years and years and years as a director and as a director dramaturg, and then just as a dramaturg. And yeah, I was never gonna be a writer. People kept saying, "Do you want to write? Do you want to write?" Like, no, no. I didn't think I was someone who had ideas. I was like, I'm really good at helping somebody shape their idea, but I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm that. And then one day I literally woke up in the morning and I can remember it so vividly. And I turned to my wife and I was like, oh, do you know what I'd like to see a play about? Love to see a play about like an older lesbian couple. And like one of them's got dementia, but like their relationship is a secret. And then maybe they get like a cleaner or something, and she's got a secret as well. And together, somehow it all. My wife just, and she works with writers. She just turned to me and she was like, nobody's going to write that except you. And I was like, oh, but I'm not a writer. She was like, wow. And so I was like, oh, okay. Um, and at the time, like one of my money jobs was I used to look after an outdoor ice rink in London at Somerset House. And so that winter, I was sort of locked away in my little duty manager's office at the end of a marquee that was a cloakroom. And I was on the computer just like going, what happens if I try writing these characters? Um, and I just wrote some scenes, and I was really fortunate to have some friends who were up for reading them. And they were like, ah, oh, we love these characters. We want to know a bit more. So I wrote a bit more, and gradually, that story, that idea, grew and grew and expanded into my first play, Elle, which only so that I probably started that journey in about 2013, and it ended up going on stage in 2023.
Wow. And I've heard before certain playwrights have talked about having this sort of ideas or like a central theme that they're interested by that they're constantly revisiting in different plays.
Oh,
Do
it's
you
so
think
true.
there's
Yeah, it's
one for
totally true.
you?
If I have to sort of really like drill down to what it is, I think it's about change. Um, that manifests in different ways. So, for instance, Ebb and Flow. When I wrote Ebb and Flow, I hadn't really written before, and people would say, "What's it about?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a play about secrets. It's about secrets. That's what it's about." And I sent it into some prizes, and it got on um, a shortlist for the Verity Bargate Prize. And they came back, and the judges' comments were like, "Oh, it's a beautiful queer love story." And I was like, "What? It's not a love story. It's a story about secrets." And then I was like, "Oh no, it is a love story." Um, but at its heart, it was about change. It was about this huge change in a relationship when one of the people um, gets dementia, and the power shifts and everything shifts in their world. Lots of my work since then has been about climate change. Also, yeah, about relationship change. Um, I'm really obsessed with time and place. So I've written a couple of plays that are set sort of in one place, but over different times. And I think, again, that's about change. It's about like, how do things change, and how do we respond to change? And I guess change changes all around us, right? Like the world is just in this kind of unstoppable, unprecedented period of change. And so that to me feels like the thing to be writing about. It's like, I'm not writing because I went to university and I think I'm clever and I think I know where to put commas or any of that. Do you know what I mean? I'm not a writer who thought of themselves as a writer. I'm a writer because there were characters and stories that I wasn't seeing on stage that I wanted to. And I write theatre to make a difference in the world. I write theatre to start conversations and to try and address the things that I think will help us move forward better. And I think making us all a bit more resilient to change and a bit more ready to embrace change. I think that's why I'm writing, and therefore that is what I write. That said, somebody said to me recently, oh, there's always like 3 characteristics to a writer's work. And it's like, well, mine has almost always got queer women in it, forming some kind of family. It's almost always got a young person in it in some way at the heart of it. And it's almost always got some kind of political historicalness in it as well. So I think those are the kind of themes that run through.
I think it's so lovely and admirable that you're making sort of positive representation for queer characters, that you're representing like the struggles that, yeah, they might have to be in a secret relationship or they might have struggles with that. But I think there was during university, we were working on new writing for queer plays, and we were having a big discussion about the differences between representing the reality and being relatable to queer people, that there's a lot of struggle and there's a lot of hatred towards them, but then also having a representation of queer joy, and that you shouldn't go to the theatre and every time you see a queer person relationship, they're dying or running away from their lover or abandoning their whole family for their lover. Just wanted to hear your opinions on that sort of.
When Ez and Flo went on, the number of lesbians who came up to me and went, thank you so much for not killing either of them. And I was like, do you know what? Like when I first started it, one of them was going to die. And I was so glad
we saved her.
we didn't go that way because, people were really grateful. I had one young lesbian couple come up to me and say, we've assumed that we've just assumed we'll never get old together, because you never see older lesbians portrayed anywhere, really. Like, I think the oldest we got was like Last Tango in Halifax, and one of them died. And so, it was really interesting with Ez and Flo, and it absolutely was about a kind of struggle. It was about the challenges of a relationship, and particularly a queer relationship that had begun 40 years ago. One of them was a teacher, and so Section 28 had played into that. Being married to a man before had played into that. Shame, blah, blah, blah. But the play opens with it being Esme's birthday, and they have cake and they dance. They do this kind of sexy dance together. And that, I remember watching that in rehearsals, and I'd written it into the play. But I remember the first time I watched it in rehearsals, I felt really moved. And I was like, we don't see this. We don't see older queer joy, certainly not in women. We just don't see it. And we don't see we don't see much older sexuality for women generally, but to see older queer female sexuality on stage, and to see these 2 women in their 60s like grinding and having a smooch, was like, even to me who'd written it, was like, oh, we need this as a community. We need this. So that feels really important to me. And also other things that I've written, I've tried to be really like, it's not about them being queer. There's a play of mine, I'm still working on it. I haven't quite worked it out yet, but it's about a sort of estranged lesbian couple, estranged at the start, one of whom is a deaf polar scientist, and one of whom is a black politician, Westminster politician. But the story isn't about them being queer. It isn't about the politician being black. It isn't about the scientist being deaf. I mean, those things all are part of their given circumstances, and of course they play a part in who they are, but it's not what the story's about. The story is about climate change and the next generation and that what we do when we're facing extinction. And those people who have read it, it was shortlisted for the very first Women's Prize for Playwriting, and some of the feedback I got from that was really beautiful, in that people were like, we love how intersectional this is, and that it's not about any of those things, but those women are these really rounded characters. And I think that that's part of what you're talking about, that thing of like, yes, we have to recognize the struggle and the othering of being queer, and that doesn't get any easier. But also it's important to go, I would say my being queer is not the most interesting thing about me. It's not the thing that necessarily defines me. Do you know what I mean? It is part of who I am, obviously. But yeah, I think trying to write diverse intersectional characters who just happen to be living their lives in these ways with these, maybe protected characteristics, but not making it always about that, is really important.
What advice would you have for people that are sort of like have written something, or they're thinking about writing? What advice would you give as a celebrated
Oh my
playwright?
gosh. Finish it. Finish whatever you're writing. That's the hardest bit. It's really easy. It's really easy to keep going back and rewriting Act One. Get to the end. It's only when you get to the end that you'll understand what it's about, and you'll be able to go back and do the second draft, which is actually the first draft, if you see what I mean. So I think that, and also only give it to people when you're ready, but you probably need to do that before you think you are. That's a really mixed piece of advice, isn't it? I think that some of the best feedback and the best spurring on that I had was letting people read it, and because it's probably more, you'll reach a point where you're like, oh, this is terrible, I hate it, I'm useless, I shouldn't do this. And actually that might be the point to give it to somebody, because they'll be like, oh, that's really interesting. And actually even one little note. And I guess a third piece of advice would be, a bottom drawer is really useful. I gave this advice to someone the other day. I was like, you should start a folder on your computer that's called bottom drawer, because what we always used to say in the old days before computers was, I'm going to put that script in the bottom drawer and leave it for a bit, because even a month away from a script, when you come back to it, the thing you couldn't solve will be obvious as soon as you look at it. You just need, sometimes you really just need a little bit of space. And I would say the thing about ebb and flow particularly, I might not ever write a play as good as that, because it took 10 years and it spent big chunks of time, maybe even a year sometimes, with me not looking at it, and then coming back to it and being like, oh, of course this needs to happen, or this character needs to be like this. So don't be afraid to have time away from it, and know that it will change. Like the ebb and flow that went on stage in 2023 was radically different, even from the ebb and flow that went into competitions 5 years before. I cut a character. Do you know what I mean? It changed really radically. So which is hard to know, because when you're writing a first draft, you think, oh, this is it, and it'll be finished. And it's like learning to enjoy the fact that a first draft is absolutely a first draft means it's easier to finish it. So I guess there's something in those two things coming together, of like knowing that a first draft is what I would call a vomit draft. You're just getting it all out. And then once you go, oh, it's this, okay, I think it's trying to be this, then you can go back and almost properly write it. And then you'll have several more drafts. So
My last question for you.
yeah.
What's the best thing about your job and what's the worst thing about your job?
Oh my gosh. I think probably the worst thing, it's hard to make a living from, is probably the worst thing. The best thing, oh my gosh. I mean, I think in terms of playwriting, there's a really, really magical moment for me. I remember the first rehearsal of Ebb and Flow, going into the rehearsal room, and there were like 25 people there who were going to be working on the show. And just having this moment of like, oh, this idea like came out of my head one morning. And now all these people are here and are going to work on it, and they care about it and they're interested in it. And suddenly we're in it together. And I always say, you know, playwriting can feel really lonely at times. But once you get to that bit where you're sharing it, even if you're just sharing it with some friends, that's when the magic starts to happen, you know. And I always say it takes a village to write a play. None of my plays have been written on their own. And for me, I guess particularly for me, coming from directing and producing, and I'm a collaborator. I like to be in the room. I like to be. I don't write one person shows because I'm not that interested in one person standing on stage and telling a story. I'm interested in people interacting with each other. And I guess in terms of the process, I'm interested in that as well. I'm interested in like, I write this and how does that make you feel? And what does that make you think? And how do I then change what I've written? And how do we create something together that is really going to touch people? And then you add in an audience, and that's a whole new moment. And that's the next bit of magic. And the experience that I had with Ebb and Flow and with other things I've written, actually, of people coming up to me afterwards and being like, oh my gosh, I need to tell you about my grandmother, or I need to tell you about my personal experience because what you've written has absolutely touched me. That is such a privilege to be able to do something that opens people up emotionally, and that you can see them feeling seen, feeling heard, understanding something about themselves or someone else for the first time. Yeah, that's a real honor, and I don't take that responsibility or that pleasure lightly. It's magical. What a thing to be able to do, right? What a job.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you and all your wise words. And
We're
I
doing
will pop your social media handles up so people can
great.
find you.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
lovely.